Good afternoon. For those of you out there still devoting your attentions to the food, I'd like to welcome you in through the door here. This is another, actually it's going to be the fifth lecture in the series this semester of the Technology, Innovation, and Global Security Program Speaker Series. We're going to continue in our tradition of having outstanding speakers giving us insights on important issues in technology-related industries. We have a special treat tonight. We have with us Kathleen Hanley, who, is it okay to call you Kathy?
That's great.
Okay. Kathy Hanley is from Carpenter Technology, which is a corporation based in Pennsylvania. It's a specialty metals producer, actually. Specialty alloys producer. I think Kathy's probably going to talk a bit about the company and its perspective. But I wanted just to briefly introduce Kathy. Kathy is the Senior Vice President for Organizational Effectiveness, Strategy, and Corporate Staffs at Carpenter. Prior to serving at Carpenter, Ms. Hanley was the quality systems expert for the Ford Motor Company, and she has a long and distinguished career in the automotive industry from 1999 to 2000. She was a manager for corporate communications and community relations for Toyota. Prior to that, she held several positions, including manager of human resource development, assistant manager of organization development, group leader, and team leader of quality control. She has degrees in social work and sociology from the University of Kentucky and an MBA from the University of Phoenix. She's involved in a large variety of community and social outreach organizations. I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of the University of Texas and our class and this speaker series to welcome Kathy Hanley to University of Texas.
So I know that this is election day, kind of a momentous election. So did everybody vote? Yes. All right, good. It's been quite interesting for me to be here on the campus today. The first presidential election that I have any memory of, which goes back much further than any of you will go, was the 1960 election in when John Kennedy was running for president, and I actually was privileged enough to meet both President Kennedy and President Johnson during that campaign. Now, I will note, however, that I was only 7 years old. So, but I do remember it, and I remember the energy behind that presidential campaign. And my father was involved in politics in Lexington, Kentucky. And so that's how I got to meet those great men. But I think the energy of today's election is almost the same. And I have to tell you, quite honestly, I wasn't sure that I was going to see that again in my lifetime because a lot of presidential elections had kind of fallen off. So it's been just a huge privilege for me to be here today and kind of remember my past and where I come from. So thank you so much for this particular opportunity. I am the Senior Vice President at Carpenter Technology. What we do is primarily specialty alloys. So I'm going to give you a little information first about our company, what we focus on, then I'm going to take you through a little trip down what we think is coming in the near future in terms of the automotive innovations and global market. And from that, what we're making plans to address as that rolls out. And then I did spend about 13 years at Toyota, which was a great experience for me. It's an education you can't buy. Started from the ground up at the Georgetown, Kentucky plant, which was the flagship North American plant for Toyota, and was lucky enough to have a lot of contact with the lead Japanese in the Toyota company, including Mr. Cho, who's currently the chairman of Toyota. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I know about why Toyota is good at what they do and why that's made a difference in the North American marketplace in terms of their position and also the position, unfortunately, of General Motors and Ford and Chrysler today. And then we'll go to questions if that works for you guys. How's that? Don't hesitate to interrupt me through the way here if you've got questions or you want clarification. Some of what we do at Carpenter's kind of was definitely initially mysterious to me, so if you're not a metallurgist, it might be mysterious to you too. So don't hesitate to stop me along the way. The first thing, of course, is the obligatory forward-looking statements, because part of what I'm going to present to you is a part of the presentation that we do for investment bankers and analysts. So, of course, we always have to tell you that, you know, we can't predict the future, and you shouldn't buy stock based on anything that I say here today. Okay.
Right straight out of your 10K.
That's right from the 10K. So, Carpenter's been in business about 119 years. We'll roll up on our 120th anniversary here very shortly. It was initially started by a man named James Carpenter, and they really launched as a company making armaments during the Spanish-American War. That was really their start, and they developed metals or an alloy that was capable of piercing armor vehicles, whether that was boats or the early versions of tanks and armored vehicles. And so that's really where they got their start and their launch. They have a long history of strong customer relationships. So what's a little bit different about Carpenter is when you buy metal from us, a metallurgist comes with it. I often say we kind of package them up in a little box and send them with a shipment, but that's not quite true. But we're one of the few metallurgy companies in the world that if you are one of our customers, you get basically free consulting on how to use our materials in your processing environment. That's what distinguishes us, that level of customer service from some of our competitors, and so we really focus on that. One of the things that I was discussing earlier today with some of the folks from your engineering college was the whole shortage of metallurgists out there in the world. So we're always on the hunt for those folks who have those kinds of backgrounds because we can optimize them because of the way we do business. We are a niche alloy manufacturer. So what does that mean? That means that we make alloys that are primarily high nickel content. So high nickel content means that the material can undergo a great deal of stress, whether that's heat or wear of various types. And so we really concentrate on that. We do make some tool steels as well and some stainless steels, but those steels are all for very specialized applications, and so they're not your more common commercialized steels like you would see on the front of refrigerators or those sorts of applications. And then we have a history of a pretty strong cash flow and keep a pretty strong balance sheet. That's one of the good things about the company today. I have to tell you, when I first went to work for them, I looked at their strong cash balance and the fact that they weren't participating in the overnight credit markets and kind of said, well, that's kind of old-fashioned, right? But clearly today it's been an advantage to us because our cash flow allows us to continue to support ourselves, and not participating in those markets means that we're able to continue to operate. Aerospace is about 39% of our sales. We do sell into forgers and fastener manufacturers who are directly making sales into the Boeing and Airbus supply chains. So a lot of what we do is dependent on those two major manufacturers, with a great deal of the metal going into engines for jet aircraft. So we do a lot of business with General Electric, Rolls-Royce, the large engine manufacturing companies. Our next largest piece of the pie there is primarily focused on what we call industrial applications. Industrial applications to us are fittings primarily. Our metals go into fittings for chemical processors, food processors, those types of applications. Some limited use in the oil field as well, but not as much as there is in the chemical applications. Then we're in automotive, medical, consumer, all others. And then if you look at our revenue by alloy type, specialty alloys are the largest chunk of that, stainless steels, titanium. We do have 2 titanium producing facilities, but we are primarily going from ingots to bar. Yeah?
Yes, ma'am. Could you go a little more into the energy and the medical? Is the medical
Sure.
for actual surgical or for actual detection devices? And is the energy, any of that componentry for nuclear?
Yeah. Yes, yes, and yes. Let me talk a little bit about energy. Energy is actually our fastest growing market, primarily because we make a non-magnetic alloy that's used to make drill collars for oil exploration in harsh environments. And so those drill collars actually surround all of the instruments that are used for direction for exploration. And so that's our largest piece of the energy market. But we do make a product called Nutrisorb, which is used for the storage of spent nuclear material from nuclear processing plants. So yes and yes. We also sell, we count it on our industrial side of the business, but we do sell some fittings that are used in nuclear power production as well. On the medical side, all of our materials go into the human body, whether it's titanium or specialty alloys. So on the titanium side, it's the screws that keep broken bones together, or the cages that help keep bad backs, rods and cages for bad backs. On the specialty alloy side, we do make metals that go into human implants for knees and hips. So it's a little bit of very special applications. Not really any surgical pieces. Let's talk a little bit more about aerospace. You can tell that aerospace, in terms of revenue, had a huge growth spurt for us about 2006, and then has grown steadily, but is beginning to sort of level out at this point in time. We do, as I said, spoke of earlier, primarily produce metals that are used in jet engines because of high heat and high corrosion and high wear. But we also have a significant portion of the business going into the fasteners that keep those jets together. We do have about 10% of the flyweight of the Boeing Dreamliner is our material. So significant. As you can imagine, the Boeing strike has been an interesting event, and we're all glad to see them go back to the work on Sunday. Because as we saw that go on further and further, of course, we became more and more concerned about cancellation of orders as we moved into the future. This is actually comes from Airline Monitor. So Airline Monitor is kind of the Wall Street Journal of the airline industry. They do 2 projections, one in January, the other one in July, about the actual build schedules that will be followed by Boeing and Airbus. So this is the latest, which was put together in July, and their projections go out, obviously, through the year 2015. So when we look into what are we planning on in terms of, obviously, revenue, and then also look at what are we going to need to do to improve our metals or our alloys, this is a primary source of data for us related to the aerospace industry. And so one of the things you might be curious about is how's the recent economic condition affecting this, and with both the strike at Boeing and the push out of the A380, which is Airbus's version, basically, of the 787 Boeing Dreamliner. Interestingly enough, the aerospace supply chain is usually about 6 months behind any event in aerospace. And so it's too soon for me to tell you exactly what that's going to mean to us. At this point in time, we're still seeing orders coming in at approximately the same level. We have not seen significant cancellation of any type within the order base for the 787. Probably the most significant change in the market has been when oil prices and fuel prices went up. A lot of the U.S. airlines and others around the world started to park their fleet. And as you can imagine, a lot of our metals go into replacement engine parts. So if there are less planes flying, that means less of them need parts. And so that's where we've seen some decrease, but we really haven't seen it in the supply chain yet for the 787 or the A380. Plus, we know some of these numbers are low because of recent orders that have been placed with Boeing for the 787. So we think that this business is good and is strong, but of course we're waiting to see with taking a deep breath what's going to happen with the economy. This kind of, I guess, summarizes what I've already talked with you about, but the short-term disruptions really are the things that we track about 6 months out. So we think that we may see some adjustment in the short term for both Boeing and Airbus, but long term we don't see it changing. Energy. I talked about energy already. Energy is our highest growth market at this point in time because of energy exploration activities. The more we start exploring for oil in the North Sea and the deserts in China and all the other places that they're exploring for oil, then the more that we sell. We are a supplier primarily to forgers who then take that metal and form it into use that goes into the oil field for all the major exploration companies in the world. So it's been a great ride so far. The downside of that is how much longer will oil be the primary basis for fuel in the world? I think maybe my lifetime, but I'm not sure all of yours. So obviously Carpenter needs to find ways to innovate products to keep us in this market well beyond the oil field days. One of the major activities that we have going on right now is, interestingly enough, with the blades and the rotor part of the wind turbines. So we have some experimental material in those applications that could prove to be interesting as time goes along. Industrial, we talked about valve fittings. Automotive. On the automotive side, and I'll talk a little bit more about automotive and what it means to us, a smaller part of the business, but still significant. Primarily, again, we're in harsh environments in the fuel injectors and turbochargers. Anything that has high heat and high wear is where our pieces go. We also have some limited application in instrumentation, primarily with bimetals that are manufactured in strips that go into sensors in automotive. Consumer, we do have a lot of applications of the same type of metals that go into the automotive sensors, that go into thermostats in your house. They go into fastener applications in housing in a very limited way. And in sports, we're on the face of a lot of golf clubs. So you may have used Carpenter material and didn't know it. So we're the ones that, give you the right reverberation as you hit the ball so that it will go further, right? That's our metal. Medical, we've talked about already. Surgical instruments is tiny, and it is so insignificant that I'm not sure it's worth discussing. But mostly it's the implant and fixative applications. International. International sales at this point in time is about 34%. It actually edged up this past quarter to about 35% of our business. We are primarily in Europe, but we are increasing our sales into Asia Pacific. And then the markets that we participate in globally mirror the markets that we participate in as a whole in the corporation. So not much difference there. We have seen, yeah.
Do you have any export control challenges?
Yes. Anybody who exports has export control challenges, right? But going into the European market, as you probably know, the REACH Act, which has been recently enacted or is about to go into place in Europe, provides special challenges for us. The other thing that we have in terms of export compliance is intellectual property. And so the transfer of intellectual property to foreign nationals becomes a problem when you have scientists and engineers on your payroll who may not be nationals, right? And so that's been a particularly thorny issue for us. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Kathy, how does your corporate compound annual growth rate compare to the international sales? What's the growth of the sales of the company as a whole?
The growth of the sales of the company as a whole is about 22%. So 22. So it's only slightly higher. Yeah. So yeah.
Do you think the protectionist measures are going to get worse as the global recession actually
I'm not an economist, so I'm not an expert on that. I think they will personally, but it's just my opinion. You can't go to the bank with that. Everybody in the room probably has one. So. Our processes are very specialized processes. We do vacuum induction melting, also known as VIM. That really means that we're melting at 0% oxygen. So that is a fairly technical process, obviously, that we do. And we also do ESR and VAR melting. And that allows us to provide to our customers these very pure, very controlled materials for these various applications. And many of them are actually melted 3 times so that we get very precise microstructure to control heat or to go into stress-based applications. We also do hot working. We do have my very favorite piece of equipment. When I went to work for went to school for social work, I never thought I'd be a manufacturing factory rat, but somehow that happened. And the rotary forge is this huge forge that beats on and processes these very large ingots that weigh thousands of tons. So it's this machine that's very big, about a football field, and makes a huge noise, as you can imagine. 4 hammers coming in from 4 different directions, and then the metal is turned through each hammer, each hammering. And so it makes a lot of noise, and it's very impressive. It's my very favorite piece of equipment out there. It is also our largest constraint, and so we're constantly looking for ways to improve that process and to look for other ways of processing material. And then we have a rolling mill. We primarily roll to bar, but we do have mills that can roll to limited applications of strip and wire. And then we do have finishing process as well, and including we are implementing or installing a new cleaning line, which will be state of the art, and looking at extended maintenance methodologies for some of our newer equipment so that we can get the most out of them for the next year or so. We have three major strategic priorities. So the methodology that we use for strategic planning is Toyota's methodology. I bet that's a big surprise, right? One of my last responsibilities there, officially on record, was corporate communications and community relations, but what I was really doing was corporate manufacturing strategic planning. And so we use Toyota's Hoshin methodology in making our strategic plans. So we have three major strategies. One is growth. Every good company should have that. If you don't find that in the information that you look at for investing in companies, I'd advise you not to invest in that company, right? Growth is always important. But operational excellence, which is our pursuit of improving processes, improving services, is a constant focus. And then technology leadership. So we are looking to be the technology leader for new application development as well as new product development in our field. We have three major competitors. The first one is a company called Allegheny Technologies Incorporated. Another one is called Specialty Metals. And then another one is called Schlumberger. They're in the oil field. You may know of them, but they also do metals processing. Yeah.
For your technology development, would you say that the majority of your intellectual property is developed in-house, or do you actively try and license other people's technology and then develop it?
Yeah, in the past it's all been developed in-house, but we currently do have licensed technology that we have acquired within the last 2 years from some other companies and a university lab or so, right? Individuals, so that have done research within universities. So, but and then we're moving more into that area because one of the challenges for companies today is that spending on R&D. Coming up with that cash for the investment, understanding what's the best bet for that cash, and developing the materials over time. Huge investment for us, just like it is any other company in the world. And so we're looking at more and more how can we either develop collaborative relationships, license, whatever it is that we need to do. And then I think I mentioned metallurgists are in short supply. So we're also looking at partnering with universities, making some investments in research in support of graduate research so that we can hopefully assure a little tighter pipeline of those metallurgists into the company. So let's talk about trends in global automotive. So obviously, the pressure on the automotive world today is around fuel efficiency, new applications of automotive drivetrains. So how can we create the vehicle that is no longer reliant on fossil fuel? How can we increase the efficiency of the usage of fossil fuel in the engines that come on the market today? All of those things are of huge concern to all of the automakers. And as they pursue that, lucky for us, the higher the fuel efficiency, the higher the heat in the engine. And so that will give us the opportunity to sell more and more material into the automotive market. If you look at CAFE, which is the corporate average fuel economy, the CAFE laws, the CAFE laws are the ones that define how fuel efficient vehicles need to be by what point in time. And so the CAFE regulations really drive the automotive manufacturers, the OEMs, to try to improve their efficiency. Lots of ways to improve that. One of the ways is to reduce weight. Most of our alloys are very lightweight in nature, but the downside of it is they're somewhat expensive. So our challenge all the time is how can we decrease the cost of processing so that we can decrease the cost of the product to our customers in the automotive world. But it's something that we work on all the time, and clearly when we look into the future, huge efforts aligned with the CAFE Act. Reduced emissions as well with the European emission standards, which are much more stringent than ours are here in the United States. We obviously are looking for ways to burn fuel more efficiently and recover the waste created in that process rather than sending it out into the atmosphere. So we have some R&D work going on in that area as well. So obviously automotive is not the largest part of our business, but still a significant part of what we do. So how is auto manufacturing responding? As we've seen with the last oil, the uptick of oil prices, all of a sudden it became very, very, what could I say? Maybe inappropriate almost to be driving around in these huge SUV vehicles, right, or pickup trucks, or any of the large 8 miles per gallon users. So we have seen the trend of the overall vehicle becoming smaller. That's an issue for the American market, however. Think about those small little vehicles that are out there. A lot of folks in the U.S. sort of don't like to drive those around, right, because you don't feel safe. So that's an issue. We think we're safe when we're in this big, huge Ford Explorer or Lincoln Navigator, and we're looking down into the cabin of the vehicle that's up next to us at the stoplight, right? We think that that's safety. That's not really safety, but it certainly is an American version of it. And so getting the Americans to move to a smaller size vehicle will be an interesting pursuit, I think, as the years come up on us. Also, the aerodynamics over the surface. So one of the problems with vehicles is, you know, they've got all these odd designs, right? If they were like a capsule, a very narrow pointed, like an Aerospace capsule or something like that, a fuselage of an airplane, be much more fuel efficient, but boy, that's not a very sexy design, is it? So cars are made primarily in the U.S. anyway for attractiveness as a primary form of the vehicle. As long as that's one of the lead drivers of the form requirement, then fuel efficiency in terms of aerodynamics is going to be an issue for the automotive industry. So if all of us decided today that we'd really like a little pencil shaped vehicle, we probably could do some things pretty quickly about the fuel efficiency of the vehicles that we drive. Lightweighting the vehicles, again, that goes with fuel efficiency. Fuel efficiency increases when you reduce the weight of the vehicle, and so clearly it's an area of great interest to us. We supply muffler hangers or exhaust pipe hangers into the industry, into the automotive industry, primarily because it's an application of one of our alloys. That's a very corrosive environment because of heat and also exposure to weather and road conditions and the elements. But being able to do that reduces the average vehicle weight by about 8 ounces, half a pound. That's significant, right? So we look for those kinds of applications as we move forward. Improved combustion, obviously, with turbochargers, variable valve timing, those kinds of applications give us an opportunity. We are looking at hydrogen fuel cell. Can our alloys be used in those fuel cell applications? One of the issues with fuel cells, if you've had any exposure to them in terms of the trial vehicles that have been put together in Detroit, you know that they're very heavy, and that's a problem. So again, lighter weight is what we're looking for. And then hybrid technology as well is obviously of great interest to the auto manufacturers. But the problem with hybrid vehicles is what the automotive world calls the duty cycle of the vehicle, right? So hybrid vehicles are at their best with low mileage, very specific applications, not great for 100,000 miles a year because the investment is probably not going to be cost effective for anyone. You're not going to see the level of fuel efficiency that you'd like to see. And so when we look at the hybrid market and our opportunity in the near future, we're primarily looking at diesel, because diesel is an application that could be in combination with hybrid technology used and used well in the United States, and you're seeing a little bit of that happening in Europe now. This is global growth projection rates, and if you saw the release yesterday on, I think it was yesterday, yeah, I think it was, on the market, you know that the whole global market fell 39% in the month of October, and so that's a significant decrease. We've never seen that before. And it has got the entire automotive market really shaking their heads and wondering what to do. So these projections were put together before yesterday's announcement. So like all projections, may or may not be as relative today under current market conditions as they were. But we clearly see Asia as the growing market for automotive. And so in alignment with that, as well as the emerging economy in China, we have recently opened an office in Shanghai and are selling as well as distributing from a warehouse in Shanghai now, and primarily into the automotive market. So it's going to be interesting to see as the effect of the economy moves into the China market. We're already seeing slowdowns there in their economy. What actually ends up shaking out in terms of the automotive market there. This is just telling you where our stuff goes. Clearly, fuel systems, as I talked about, bolts and fasteners, that's the hangers that I mentioned. And then all others is primarily around applications that either we have a unique application on a vehicle that is a high-end vehicle, so Lexus or Mercedes or BMW, and it is specific to that particular manufacturer, or it could be a instrument panel or electronics type application. So when we look at the automotive market, we're kind of bullish on it, really, because of all the different opportunities that we see. When we look at the needs of the original equipment manufacturers and what their requirements are going to be, pretty much across the board, whether you're talking about technology, emissions, any of the major factors that are now at play in the automotive market, Carpenter has an opportunity to play in that market. And so we're very bullish on automotive today. However, we're also very clear on the fact that the economy is bringing factors into play that no one considered, and so we need to be a little more cautious about our approach to the market.
So on the diesel,
Mm-hmm.
are over 50% Europe.
Yep.
What do you think the slope will be in the eventual penetration here in the U.S. of diesel?
Some of that, I think, depends on the marketing plans of the companies, right? If you look at General Motors, who's probably one of the bigger players in diesel, they certainly have some plans to move that way. Ford, we're not seeing much of a movement on their part towards that. We know that Toyota is playing in that market now. So in terms of trajectory, if the oil prices had stayed up, I would have bet that we would have seen a really significant growth in that over the next 5 years. It kind of depends on where the oil prices go, right? Because as Americans, we seem to have a ceiling, right? We can only take so much pain. And then we'll look for alternatives. But initially, we want to maintain our lifestyle.
It seems like the most interesting product that set the stage for that is the Acura Honda
Mm-hmm.
engine that will come out D-Tech this spring.
This spring, yep.
And that'll either make it or break it.
It could. It could. But remember, Honda also came out with their hybrid before Toyota came out with the Prius. Right. So this kind of brings me to the issue in terms of automotive market, globalization versus localization versus internationalization. I'm sure you guys are familiar with these terms, right? Yeah? Yeah, this is the right response. Okay. When you look at the way the different companies, the major manufacturers in the world have approached this particular topic, I think in essence it's part of the secret in the sauce to their successes or their failures. And so you look at General Motors, who's had a combination of globalization and localization in terms of their approach to the international scene. If you look at General Motors today, they're very successful in Asia. They're very successful in Western Europe. And they make profits there, and those are great applications of localization, right? Where they actually began to manufacture to meet those local market drivers, and a good strategy. Ford, late to the game in terms of localization, primarily used globalization as their approach to the market. And you're seeing the results of that. Ford is not as much of a well-known or in-demand vehicle in Asia, which of course is where the new emerging market is. They do have some limited sales popularity in India, and of course they do have a presence in Western Europe. But this whole strategy, when you look at it, then step back, look at what Toyota and Honda decided to do back in the 80s, right? Which was to really pursue localization. Now, the problem with localization, of course, is the cost involved with localization, because it really means that you have to design for that market, you have to preferably manufacture in that market, and set up basically small regional, global regional versions of your operations around the world as you identify the appropriate markets. Lots of investment, lots of understanding of the differences of customer requirements. So a lot of marketing surveying and really defining customer and what they mean in every area. So huge expense to companies. So only the largest ones, I think, in the world usually engage in localization. Toyota has done a really good job at that around the world, and continue to make their efforts at being the #1 global automotive supplier or automotive sales. So they approached it purely as localization. So for companies, little companies like Carpenter, we're only $2 billion. So it's a big issue for us, right? We manufacture primarily in Reading, Pennsylvania, which is a small town, right? Kind of in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, and difficult to get products out of to other places in the world. But it's where the company started. And for good or bad, we hold on to this belief that if it's at all possible, manufacturing should remain in the United States. Manufacturing needs to stay in America. And manufacturing needs to stay in Reading, Pennsylvania, because the actual graduation rate from high school in the Reading, Pennsylvania, and Berks County area of Pennsylvania is only 45%. So what would those people do for work? What would those people do for jobs if Carpenter pulled out of Reading, Pennsylvania? We are not an employer on that large a scale in our other manufacturing locations, which are outside of Pittsburgh, in Florida, and then we do have a small metal powders plant in Sweden. But when we look at what should our strategy be for the future, the constant question that we consider is, are we trying to globalize? Do we need to localize? Or should we continue what has been our current path, which is more internationalization, which is around joint venture relationships and partnerships in other areas of the world? So we have a joint venture with a company called Bharat Forge. Anybody know Bharat Forge? Largest automotive forger in the world, in India. The Kalyani family own Bharat, and we have a joint venture with them in India, where we do manufacture. That is where we manufacture some of the valve steel material that we sell into the Asian automotive market. But that's a partnership. So what should our approach be in terms of the manufacturing side of the business? Clearly, in terms of sales, we've globalized. We have offices in Belgium. We have salespeople all over Western Europe. We have new salespeople in Eastern Europe as we begin to build into that market. We have sales and distribution in China as well as in Singapore now. So clearly, we've moved into the globalization in terms of sales, but the real crux issue for us, just as it is for automotive, is what is your approach? So when you look at what happened with Toyota, if I can give you a little bit of a history lesson. When Toyota was considering what should their approach be to build their sales, they obviously targeted the North American market and specifically the U.S. market for where they were going to try to capture a larger and larger percentage of the actual vehicle sales. So back in the early 80s, the key question at that point in time was, how could they capture the heart of the American consumer? Think about the 80s, and at that point in time, there was still a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment. There was a huge amount of buy American sentiment all over the United States. And so they commissioned some marketing studies. And what the marketing studies showed back at that point in time, very interestingly enough, was that when you buy your very first new car, when an American buys their very first new car, so they've gotten a job, right, and they've got a decent income, and they're going to buy their first new car, they tend to buy the same brand as they drove when they learned to drive and they were a teenager, right? And so everybody's got memories of their first car, right? It may have been, a bright yellow Duster, Plymouth Duster or whatever, right? That you drove around and you put it through all sorts of things that a car was never intended to go through, but it survived and it got you home every night. And so we had a tendency as consumers to consider that brand first, and the majority of time to buy that brand as our first car. So at that point in time, the number one, this is again the early 80s, the number one vehicle that was being purchased first time out was, of course, the General Motors vehicle, right? Because General Motors, right? They were the number one manufacturers, and the cars held up over time. And we all had memories of our first Chevy Bel Air or whatever it was, Camaro or whatever it was that we had driven or that our parents owned. And so that was what we tended to purchase. So the question for Toyota became, how do we turn that around? And so what they set out to do was increase the life cycle of their vehicle, or the lifetime of their vehicles. So at that point in time, in the early 80s, Detroit was primarily designing for a max life of about 150,000 miles on a vehicle. So Toyota decided, let's build and design for 200,000 miles. Because what we want to have is the most reliable used car on the market. Not new car, used car on the market. So that the car that you remember driving when you first learned to drive is a Toyota, right? Because customer loyalty is a primary factor in automotive sales. And so that's what they set out to do. How do you think they've done? Right? At the same time, General Motors and Ford were planning to export their vehicles into Japan. Anybody know what happened? Left side drive vehicles into a right side drive market. Steering wheel's on the wrong side. Didn't look at the customer. Didn't look at manufacturing at that point in time in Asia. Significant misread of what was going on in that market. And in my opinion, they've continued those sorts of gaffes as they've entered the markets around the world. Now, they're doing well in some places, but at the end of the day, you have to hold the American market as well as the other markets, right? Because the American market today is where the money is, right? Eventually, that won't be true, but today, that's where the money is. So it's a critical question. So for little Carpenter, as we look at emerging economies in China, India, and a certain extent into Eastern Europe, we have to consider those same questions. What do those customers there need? Are there specialty applications that we should be producing in those countries for those markets that are distinctly different from what we build here in the U.S. in Reading, Pennsylvania? And what should our role be in that emerging economy? So it's a tough question for us, and we have ongoing efforts at that. You know, when we look at it, the pros of globalization is that you get to participate in those diverse markets, but you know the downside is that you may miss the opportunity to diversify by the economy of the local market. The other thing is it's really difficult to establish relationships with key decision makers in international companies if everything is done in Reading, Pennsylvania. So establishing those relationships can be really difficult, and a lot of sensitivity to the home economy. So we're obviously highly sensitive to the U.S. economy, even though we are selling into global markets. I talked about internationalization. We've done that to a certain degree. We continue to look for opportunities. We do have a relationship with several European alloy manufacturers, and we continue to try to build those relationships as well as licensing of products from some international companies as well. But for us, it continues to be, what do we do, right? So let's talk about the difference between the big three, which were the big three, right? GM, Ford, Chrysler, and companies like Toyota and Honda, the Japanese, and then also Hyundai, which is making a huge surge into the North American market, right? So when I step back and look at the differences, because I did have the opportunity when I left Toyota, I did consulting with the big three in the U.S., and got an opportunity to look at the differences between the systems. The first thing is that understanding of what is the customer, who is the customer, and what does the customer want. So I give you an illustration of that. When I went to Ford for one of my last consulting gig there in quality systems, I looked at what's standard on a vehicle, right? What does every vehicle come with in a Ford nameplate? What is standard for those vehicles? Well, the truth of the matter was there was no central standard, right? No central standard offerings in terms of everything has an automatic transmission, everything has automatic windows. Anybody remember roll-up windows? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, right? Right. You still have them? Lucky you. All right. There you go. Well, in 2006, think about this, 2006, brand new Ford Taurus, Ford Explorer, any Ford you can name, automatic windows was not standard. You paid for that, right? You paid extra for that option. So what you saw Toyota, Honda, and Ford doing, or Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai doing, is packaging things as standard packages that were based on what the customer and market were driving, depending on the area of the world. Toyota and Honda being very good at doing that. That lets them limit and constrict the amount of variation in production, which makes for a much more efficient production environment, which of course obviously reduces cost. But at that point in time in 2006, Ford was starting to move that way. General Motors, not so much. Chrysler, never heard of it. So when you look at approaches to markets, you see a significant difference between the players out there. Hyundai is doing exactly the same thing. What Hyundai is doing is a very interesting study and almost an exact duplication of Toyota's strategy. Now, here's the good and bad thing about that. Bad thing is, Toyota did just build a truck plant in San Antonio, right? With today's market conditions. So maybe imitating Toyota is a good thing, but I think you're probably learning to think a little bit on your own is a good thing as well. Then you look at the way they do product development. So in a Toyota or a Honda vehicle, even when they do a major remodel or a major model upgrade, right? And they do that about every 5 years or so, because as Americans, we get tired of looking at the same vehicle all the time, right? And so we want the latest snazzy looking thing, and so they have to upgrade those vehicles on an ongoing basis. Toyota limits on a major model upgrade only 10 to 20% of the vehicle is changed. So what usually gets changed is the outside external appearance, some of the materials you'll touch as a consumer, and the electronic gadgets and gadgets, right? But at its core, both Toyota and Honda will tightly control how much change is in a vehicle. Again, that goes back to assurance of quality, efficiency of production, less investment in change, right? All of those types of efforts are underway. So when you look at a Toyota vehicle, which I can speak of in detail, primarily obviously because I was there and I know a little bit more about them, on a Toyota vehicle, there are 10 basic fasteners that are not screw or bolt in nature. There are 10 screws and 8 bolts. They are different lengths, as you can imagine, depending on the application, but the circumference or the diameter is the same. The type, the thread, those things are the same. And they're used throughout all Toyota vehicles. Not just one, but all Toyota vehicles. So, anybody want to guess how many different screws there are in a Ford Taurus? More.
200.
More.
500.
More.
I know the answer. About 38.
8,000. And they can all be redesigned every time there's a model change. And they have designers who just do screws. Now, let me ask you, how, if you were an engineer, what a thrill would that be, right? To redesign a screw, right? I think you were going to ask a question.
I was just wondering why Ford didn't figure out the whole standardizer for people.
Well, this is the answer that they gave me when I asked that question. Because I was a little, as you can imagine, shocked, right? They said, well, we don't want to discourage new engineers from being able to use their creativity. And so we assigned screws and nuts and bolts to new engineers.
Oh my God. Sorry.
So, totally different approach, right? So when you look at why is Toyota and Honda and Hyundai in these days and times, why are they more successful? Why are they more profitable? A lot of it goes back to those simple rules of engineering. Yeah.
You talked about standardized packages. What about the opposite industries in India
Uh-huh.
has done the exact opposite with the stripped down model?
Right.
And that's what they're selling in people's car. And it doesn't have the, even mufflers and
Right.
standardized, all the stuff is
Right. And that's appropriate to the Indian market, right? Totally appropriate.
how you would think that to the other markets.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah, there could be application to other markets. Now, I will tell you that Toyota does the same thing. The stripped down car that they sell in India and in China sure doesn't look like a Lexus, right? They've got a little 3-cylinder vehicle, not 4, 3, that they sell over there.
But perhaps because Ford's trying to put their, I mean, like you said, Ford's trying to put their vehicles there, and in a country like India or China,
They won't sell.
that's the next one.
Right, right, exactly. So why would you do that, right? It really is about understanding what is your market. When you look at General Motors, when General Motors moved into China, they were really selling what is the equivalent of a mid-size car in China. Now, the great thing was they got a lot of sales to the Chinese government, and the officials of the Chinese government were riding around in those vehicles, and so that really helped them. Now, however, they are building a more stripped-down model and selling it into the Chinese market, but it wasn't the way they went first. So it really is about understanding your market, understanding what the customer requires, what the quality requirement is. Yeah.
Do you have any idea why they're refusing to understand the market?
Why they're, I'm sorry.
Why GM is just, I mean, are they just not doing any market research?
Now they're probably not doing a whole lot of market research because market research is expensive. And I don't think they have a whole lot of extra money to throw around. But I will tell you that what I walked away from Detroit with, it was a fairly significant impression that it was arrogance. They were going to dictate to the market what the market wanted.
Do they have other choice?
Not often. Not often. Not often.
So do you see outsiders like Mullally helping with that a lot?
Yes.
As far as the corporate hubris that is so...
Yes, and Mullally has been instrumental in trying to break some of that down. But Ford is an old culture, right? Over 100 years old. And when you look at how did Henry Ford set up that company and what did he encourage among his first executives, he really did encourage them to compete with each other. And in that competition to win at the expense of fellow executives, which set up a lot of individual functions with, fiefdoms. And to a certain extent, Ford is still that way. Mullally's really working on it, and he's made a significant difference. But Bill Ford was a nice guy. He's a really nice man.
Is Wagner and Lutz the combination that can really change GM, or do you think that?
No, I think they're old automotive. I really think it takes new blood, right, to really make a change. Yeah.
I have a question. What attracted you to Carpenter Industries since you were in the automotive industry for so long? Was it their innovation in the what you were explaining about the engines and stuff, or is it your ability to bring your quality background into Carpenter?
A little bit of both of those things, but I'm going to tell you the blunt, honest truth. Ann Stevens, who's the CEO of Carpenter Technology, I've known her since she was at Ford. I was at Toyota, many years. And we always said we would work together at some point in time, actually literally work together, not just consultant and those kinds of things. But I was never willing to work for Ford as a Ford employee. So when this opportunity came along, Ann and I think a lot alike. We approach a lot of strategic situations from the same perspective, and so it works. But I have a little different experience, so I kind of balance that Ford thing, right, with the Toyota thing, which together makes a pretty good combination. So it was an opportunity of a lifetime. You don't always get those opportunities in the business world to work with somebody that you really respect, you really like, and you understand the way they think. Those opportunities don't come very often, and it's a huge, huge plus for me personally.
I kind of noticed when we looked at the Fords, there was a lot of former Ford execs there, it seemed, or people that had ties to them.
Yeah, we have one guy who has a Ford background who's in charge of manufacturing now. Yeah. But I think that's it. Yeah.
How relevant do you think your training as a social worker relates to what you do today?
It's very relative. Thank you very much. Because, at the end of the day, companies are societies, right? That's all, that really is what they are. They're a society with its own culture. And because of that, you really need to understand humans, human motivation, and the way that societies work together, either effectively or ineffectively. And so it's been a huge, I think, advantage for me to have the social work background. Now, Anne, quite honestly, will occasionally say, oh, God, you're being a social worker, right? Because I'll launch into some sort of theory of social stratification and culture and all those kinds of things, and she rolls her eyes. But it is a huge factor in making a successful company, I think. So. Yeah.
Earlier today, I made the statement that I thought there was something genetic about the Japanese that made them better manufacturers than the Western world. And you pointed out it wasn't that at all.
No. Because everything, I don't know about other industries, but I do know about the automotive industry in Japan, and of course it was devastated during the Second World War. And so when MacArthur was king of Japan after the Second World War, he brought in guys like Deming to teach the Japanese, because think about made in Japan, even when I was a child, meant it was sub-quality goods, right? And so you bought it, but you knew it was going to fall apart pretty quickly. But if it had a utilitarian purpose, you would make the purchase and expect it to fall apart. So after the Second World War, Deming and a lot of other U.S. experts spent a lot of time rebuilding Japanese industry, and the Japanese listened. Now, Deming tried to do the exact same thing in Detroit, and they didn't listen. So I don't think it's a genetic issue. I really do think the only part of it might be discipline, that they're willing to keep at whatever it is they've set their eyes towards, or the goal that they've set.
But don't the quality of the Hondas and the Ohio and the Toyotas and the Georgetown plant prove that you can do quality
Yeah,
manufacturing?
exactly.
For example?
Exactly. I think they do. And it was a great day at Georgetown, Kentucky, when the Georgetown Camry was higher quality than the Tsutsumi Camry. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, what do you think the public perception is going to be about the Chevy Volt? Most people think that GM killed the electric car. And also, do you think it's going to help GM turn around?
I think it's going to be an also ran. That's my personal opinion. It might have some impact on GM's image, but it's going to be an expensive vehicle, right? The costs continue to escalate on the development of that vehicle. What you hear about in the press is probably not always accurate. So if they're saying $40,000 is the suggested retail price of that vehicle today, which I think is the last that I read, that's a limited market. And GM really needs to make that change on a broader base market. My personal opinion.
$8,000 tax credit should help too.
It might, but if you've got $40,000 to spend on a car, you might not be willing. May not be concerned about the $8,000 tax credit, right? If it was a $20,000 vehicle with an $8,000 tax credit, then we could be talking. Then it might turn around all of General Motors in the North American market. Yeah.
So just the 8,000 screw
Uh-huh.
example is a pretty shocking story.
It is. It's huge, isn't it?
It's just shocking.
Right.
I mean, it's not like this is rocket science. That
No.
People you should be able to figure out that this is going to be a major source of cost.
Yep.
Yet, so both GM and Ford have been going through these years of management sort of turnovers, and we're going to, and this is like the most elementary thing you would
Right.
think.
Exactly.
So is this just a story of consistently poor management on a decade's scale, or what's going on here exactly?
My opinion is it's consistently poor management decisions on a decade scale. They are working on it, though. I can talk about what some of the things that Ford has done in terms of global product development. Now they have a global product development theory, and they are trying to do things like reduce the number of part numbers and types of screws, and limit the number of the amount of percentage of redesign for a model upgrade. All of those kinds of principles they are implementing now. But what worries me is it too little, too late? The other principle that the Japanese manufacturers use is what they call waterfall design. So what that means is they initially design for a limited market any new application, so new electronics, new materials, whatever. And primarily they introduce, at Toyota, they introduce that at the Lexus level, right? And then if it works, and at the same time, think about this in terms of customer satisfaction strategy. When you think about buying a Lexus, if you buy a new Lexus, if that thing breaks down, they're going to come pick you up on the side of the road, bring you a new car, you drive it off, and they're going to take your vehicle back and fix it, and then they're going to bring your fixed vehicle back to you, right? So small market, really, really tight customer relationship. So that lets them do a little experimenting. Maybe a little bit more than you would think you would do with a luxury vehicle, right? But then if it works, they roll it down. So what was on a Lexus 10 years ago is in a Corolla today.
But isn't that just deploying what electric starters that GM invented
Yeah.
in the 20s, and they take a trickle down?
Yeah. But they don't do that anymore. They invented this stuff. Toyota, Honda, Hyundai didn't invent this stuff, right? Toyota would tell you today, and one of the things that they used to tell us as management in American management is we owe this company to Ford. We owe this company to Ford because after the Second World War, Henry Ford Deuce opened the doors and said, come look, come see what we're doing. That, along with Deming and Deming's work, allowed them to go back and plan a different kind of car company. And it all came from here. Yeah.
Do you have any opinion on the role that management plays in the demise of the big three? Because they get a lot of flack.
They get a lot of flack, but I don't know how much of that is honestly deserved. There's two sides on a bargaining table. There are two sides that show up to a bargaining table, and management is one of them. So I think they take a little more flack than maybe they deserve.
We've been talking about a little bit about the 8,000 fastener example.
Right.
From the flip side, they're not the high corrosion, high technology materials, but let's say they were. I mean, as a customer, having that great variety of components, do you see that as beneficial when they're your customer, or do you want them to be more like Toyota? So
No.
we talk about it as, maybe it's dumb, but is it good for you?
No, I want it to be, it's better for me if they're predictable, right? Because if I know that I'm going to make 10,000 pounds of this for them every month, that's a great thing for me. It's a predictable production cycle for me. If I'm going to make 10,000 pounds, but it's going to be 2,000 different combinations, that's a real difficult thing. And in the automotive market, which is so heavily driven by price, right, in the market, really tough to control your costs in that kind of an environment. So my preference is, if we find an application, let's do it everywhere, right, on all your vehicles, and not this spotty kind of stuff. But I'm a factory rat that's really into production standardization. So, yeah.
If the Japanese manufacturers were not introducing big changes and only introducing the superficial changes in fee,
Right.
how does it justify their research and development costs?
They do R&D, and they do an extensive amount of R&D, but they use different types of applications that they think are translatable into the more mass market application. So, for instance, they spend a lot of money on engine development, and initially, those metals will go into racing vehicles or boats or whatever they're pursuing. They check and understand the way that those materials work or those technological applications work, and then translate that. So they spend the R&D money in a smaller application, prove it, and then move it into the mainstream. So that's what they do. And they move it into the mainstream through the Lexus. Yeah, Bill?
Do you think the Chinese and Indian automotive manufacturers are going to follow the Japanese model or the American model?
Well, I can't speak for the Indians so much. I don't know as much about that particular area. I can guess. I have an opinion, but I don't know. I do know that when Toyota formed their relationship with China, um, and Toyota was not China's first choice as a partner for manufacturing, because they're not great lovers of the Toyota company as a whole. So the deal they made was that, and they have a 50-50 relationship with the Chinese government for the plants there. And they just announced last week they're building their 10th plant in China. The deal they made was knowledge transfer. So in order to be able to manufacture in China, Toyota had to do knowledge transfer in a much more aggressive form than any government has ever required of them. So do I think it's possible? Yeah, I think China will probably copy it. But I don't know about India. Yeah.
To also speak to India, they have a collaborative agreement between most manufacturers there called SIAM, Society of Automobile Manufacturers, and they have a very low technology transfer rate, which is one problem is they work
Right.
through the government and through private industry. But they have more of a streamlined process, so they collectively within the country they share information, but between countries they still have issues.
And part of the problem is for those of us who manufacture and think about manufacturing in China or India is intellectual property laws are a little problematic, right? So.
In what way?
Primarily because, especially in China, there really are no laws to protect your intellectual property as a manufacturer, and so it's very very well known that obviously they may capture your copyrights, your patents, all those kinds of things.
The laws themselves are not a problem.
It's the lack of laws. Yeah. Yep. Which is a law, right? If there's no law, it's the law, right?
Well, you mean enforcement, right?
Right.
Not the law.
Well,
The law exists.
Well, it's okay.
Yeah. I think I would debate with you in China whether or not the law exists, but.
Well, they're a member of the WTO, right? So.
Yeah.
There's a certain minimum standard that they're required to have, but enforcement, on the other hand, is
Yeah. Different.
different question.
Right.
In fact, I remember listening to a National Public Radio program not long ago, and they said that all the manufacturing companies that go to China, whether they be from Europe or from the United States, all have to share the intellectual property with them.
Yeah.
So that's not just exclusive to one company; they all have to do it.
Right. Right. Exactly. Which is, when you think about an emerging economy, not so big a deal, right? So if you think about the intellectual property and knowledge that Toyota is sharing today, or that Carpenter would have to share in an emerging economy and an emerging market, those are stripped down cars or lower end, more consumer type metals for us, right? And the manufacturer of those kinds of things, pretty broad knowledge set, not a whole lot of secret in that sauce. We would start to worry if we felt like we needed to transfer knowledge of our highest level products. And so we don't ever consider melting those higher level products in China because we don't want to transfer that intellectual property. But could we go into China, and it's something that we look at all the time, both China and India, with lower level products in our portfolio that are not so, not so precious to us? Sure. And we think about that.
Perhaps this is contentious. I guess that was an issue of intellectual property. Obviously, you don't want your high-end products
Right.
with less copyrights taken, but at the same time, we are giving this technology that was developed, 10, 20, 30 years ago to these countries.
Right.
And then we're saying, oh, well, we're giving you this old technology, but we don't want you to pollute. So, for example, in a lot of developing countries, the cell phone, well, they skipped landlines altogether.
Sure.
Cell phone.
Yep.
So what about, collaborative efforts
Yeah.
Because it's obviously a problem environmental-wise, and Carpenter has a role in emerging technologies. Is
Right.
that an option?
Yeah, I think it is to a certain extent. Quite honestly, what we put into the automotive market, not our most secretive material. Energy, medical is interesting. Medical is interesting because just in terms of emerging economies, because when you look at what is being pulled into those markets today in India and China, primarily it's from us, it's the titanium products that go into the screws that keep bones together. So it's not the special applications for knee transplant, new knees or new hips, or the more exotic stuff that's done in either Western Europe or North America in terms of medical, because their culture is different, their economy is in a different place, their society is in a different place. And I'm not sure that they'll skip from bone screws to whatever the next version of knee transplant metal is.
So perhaps medical's a bad example,
Yeah.
but energy, I mean, I listen to these investors talking out in the millions or billions of dollars
Yeah.
about what they're throwing into India and China, and a lot of these capabilities, like for example, you talked about Carpenter makes
Wind turbines, yeah.
Turbines. A lot of these countries don't have capacity to build the ones of size they need. So
Right.
why doesn't? I mean, have you talked about?
Yeah, we actually, and quite honestly, behind that is the Kalyani group in India. So we're doing some joint venture there with them. We don't have any manufacturing in China right now. So, but in India we do. Yeah, because there's a lot more application there, as you can probably imagine, and as well as some nuclear. Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, I just wanted to parenthetically note that I thought there was a problem recently with Indian wind turbine sales running into. I gather that's not your materials.
No.
Okay. There was a.
But could be the reason that mayhaps we were looking.
Invited in.
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to ask about the U.S. auto industry, sort of for sentimental reasons.
Yeah.
So this is an industry that's been in trouble now for 20 years.
Yep.
Right?
At least, yeah.
At least. It's been facing declining market shares. It's been no secret that they've been under intense competition. It's still a big chunk, not as big as it used to be, but it's still a relatively large share of the U.S. economy.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose if you look at foreign-owned auto manufacturers that have U.S. plants, maybe it's not in such bad shape anymore. But certainly the traditional heartland of the U.S. auto industry is in bad shape, and it's been in worsening condition for 20 years.
Yes.
No real solution to the problem. No real signs really of focus on solutions to the problems. I'm looking at the situation and asking, and I don't have to tell you that GM is perilous with all the major auto manufacturers.
Right.
There's really only two left, right? Chrysler's already sort of essentially been through the ringer.
Right.
They're both perilously close to bankruptcy. Major implications for all the upstream sectors that supply them. The Hail Mary pass is the Volt, which I hear about a lot from Dave Tuttle here. Going through your story, you don't go from not producing any at all to mass production, huge scale without having done a little bit of debugging of sort of the basic,
Yep.
limited production, which is kind
Yep.
of like how Toyota introduced the Prius.
Right.
And how Honda started out
Right.
with its new powertrain, right?
Right.
And they're going to go from 0 to 60,
Uh-huh.
and that's going to save the company. And that's just not a very credible story.
That's a bet the farm move, right?
Yeah, but more than bet the farm, you bet the farm on the horse you never raced before.
Right.
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 I mean, this is a very depressing story, and it's hard to see how it ends well.
Well, the demise of the American automotive industry is a tragedy. It is an absolute tragedy. And it did not. Yeah, you're right, Dave. It did not have to happen. But it was a lot of arrogance. I can tell you in 2001, when I made my first trip into Detroit, never saw a more arrogant bunch of executives anywhere. And I've been in a lot of companies since I left Toyota, in a lot of different industries as a consultant. But the arrogance of the automotive Big Three was just overwhelming to me back then. And I think although their attitudes have changed, right, and they're a little more open today, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the future holds for them. But then the other side of that is, think about General Motors going out of business, right?
Yeah, right.
Think about that. Think about the repercussions on the U.S. economy if that happened. It's almost unbelievable. But when you think about trying to change General Motors or Ford, can you change the U.S. government? Because it's almost, GM itself is a very close bureaucratic organization to the government.
But I think there's hope.
Yeah.
I lived through that.
Yeah, there is always hope. Right.
And it took an outsider.
And it took an outsider to come in.
Young Turks.
Right.
To say, this is nonsense, and who hadn't been indoctrinated.
Right.
So you kind of squeeze it.
Right.
But the thing is that the top, like the Gerstner,
Right.
had to start delayering the organization, getting the right people
Right.
in charge.
Right.
That would further propagate centers of excellence.
Right.
And changes of attitude.
Right.
And so it can be done. I've seen it personally.
It can be done, and IBM did a good job at it, but it was very painful, right? And they're a totally different company today than they were.
The first thing you do is start laying off executives versus all the employees, and you start having accountability.
Yeah.
Well, no, the first thing you do is get the new leader.
Yeah, the first thing is the new leader. The first thing is the new leader, and you have to have a new leader who's willing to make those sorts of changes. So, one of the things positive for Ford that I would say is Mullally, and then he brought in Jim Farley, who came from Lexus. The success of Lexus is in large part due to Jim Farley. So, great decision on his part. However, the guy he's left in quality control, old boy, old network. Mark is a longtime Ford employee. I don't know that I go that far, but he's interesting. Yeah, he's interesting. He's old Ford, brought up through the system.
So do you think Ford and GM are banking on the fact that the U.S. government isn't going to let them fail?
Yeah.
That's my question.
I think they have to, don't you?
I don't know.
Well, and then how can you not bail them out if you're bailing out all these financial? If you're bailing, you just spent $780 billion, right, on bailing out the banks.
Well, it's not clear. I mean, not to. I'm not going to argue with you about this
Yeah.
because you may very well be right. But in principle, it doesn't necessarily have to be $700 billion at the end of the day that you've spent.
Right. In principle.
In principle.
Yeah.
Well, Kathy, on this
Yeah.
let them fail versus bailing out, we chatted a little bit about bailing out the overnight credit.
The overnight credit market. Yep.
Had we not put money into the system that would allow companies to be able to borrow on an overnight basis to run their company,
right,
pay their employees, pay their utilities, every daily operation, they would fail.
Yeah.
How serious would it be to let GM fail versus letting the entire overnight credit system fail? Are they comparable disasters?
No, they're not comparable disasters because obviously when you're talking about the overnight credit market, you really are talking about most of the major companies in the United States.
In the world.
But in the United States for sure. Were dependent on the overnight credit market because they were using their cash to buy assets, right? and then using the overnight credit market to sustain their cash flow, their regular daily cash flow. And you can't switch that strategy overnight, and so it's much larger, one General Motors, but General Motors is a very large company, and a lot of folks don't realize how far those tentacles reach into the United States.
You know, there's another, excuse me, one more time.
Yeah.
There's another model that I was familiar with. If I go back and look at Xerox in the mid-1970s, Federal Trade Commission came in and made a ruling against Xerox using monopolistic practices.
Right.
We were bundling copiers, bundling toner, bundling paper. If you're going to get our copiers, which everybody wanted, you have to buy our paper and you have to buy our toner.
Right.
The FTC came in and said,
can't do that.
Can't do that.
Right.
And required not only that they unbundle this, but that they give away all their patents. And I would say by early 80s, when these patents had gone mostly to Japan, we believed that the Japanese were dumping in our market because they were selling copiers cheaper than we could manufacture.
Right.
We were in a sense of denial for several years, just as the automotive industry was. And we had a attitude of don't tell us what you want as a customer, we'll tell you what you need.
Right.
You know, we invented this technology. We know more about it than you do. We'll tell you what you need. Don't tell us what you want. And of course, the Japanese were making desktop copiers that a secretary could change the toner in because they had a cartridge. Just take the old cartridge out, throw it away, put it not in the Xerox machine. You had to pour in toner. You had to change the photoreceptor. All of those things that you had to have a technician do. Now, Xerox went through, by the mid-1980s, a disaster.
Right.
They turned around and have come back as a much smaller company. Today they're $17, $18 billion in sales. In the mid-80s, early 80s, they were a $25 billion company. So instead of growing, they've shrunk in size. But if you walk into an office today, you see a fair amount of Xerox equipment.
Yeah.
Now, that's not an IBM kind of turnaround.
No.
Where they're a $100 billion company and still growing. But you may have a shadow of GM or Ford or Chrysler. I happen to agree that I do not believe we should pay GM and Chrysler to think about merging. I wouldn't have bailed out the credit market either, but I'm an old cynic.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there is another model. And
there is.
Xerox
there is.
A diminished company.
Right.
That was once the darling of. In fact, there were stories when I went there of $1 million Buicks because somebody sold their Xerox stock, buy a Buick, and the stock was going through the roof.
Yeah.
You know, so they kept the stock instead of buying a Buick. It had $1 million in value of Xerox instead of a $5,000 Buick.
Yeah.
So all the mature companies that I've studied or lived, been part of, that survived, it was always a near-death, not death.
A near-death experience with a new leader.
With a new leader.
Yep.
And the right combination of all those human factors
Right.
that we're talking about that are so essential.
Right. Yeah. And you have to be willing to do that. And to get past that, you have to get past the arrogance. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Well, I was semi a part of the Arthur. Well, I wasn't responsible for, but when Arthur Anderson collapsed, all the offices were absorbed by. Well, the office that my husband was a part of was absorbed by another accounting firm.
Right.
And we were at a firm outside of the U.S. and so I think in different locations, different Arthur Anderson offices were absorbed by different firms.
Right.
So is there any way that, say the GM collapses, and I know that Arthur Anderson made examples when pretty much the government shut them down and they weren't going to collapse otherwise. But,
Right.
is there any, possibility of like some sort of skill transfer and parts and materials transfer? Because it's not like their employees can't work. It's not. There's still value in their company. It's just that
Sure.
producing isn't right for the market. So
Stranger things have happened,
It
right?
would be, pretty cheap, probably. Is there any?
Today, yeah, today it might be, but there's always at the end of the day there's the ROI, right?
Well, right.
And so would it be worth it to them to take on that burden, which it would be a burden, right? Initially,
Powertrain worth a lot in itself?
GM Powertrain by itself is, yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying this.
GM Powertrain is worth a lot. GM Total Automotive, not as much, right? I'm sorry, I'm probably over time, aren't I?
Well, I'm just going to say, before they kick us out, we probably ought to end this. We can stick around for a few minutes. There's still some refreshments out there, which I'd like to invite you to. But I'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.